So, Duncan, thank you so much for taking the time to be a part of our community of practice channel on YouTube. And on behalf of Setsi, I thank you so much for your leadership today.
Well, thank you for having me.
So, as always, we begin by acknowledging the original stewards of the various lands that we are on. We also acknowledge our ancestors. We acknowledge those who toiled without compassion or compensation. We acknowledge all the elders and community stalwarts whose shoulders stand on as we build, share, learn together for our collective liberation and sovereignty. So, if you can please do us the honor of introducing yourself to our listeners, viewers, tell us about your amazing work.
Yeah, thank you so much, and thank you for having me. My name's Duncan Fields. I'm an associate director at the Tamarack Institute's Learning Center, and I have the great privilege of wearing many hats at the organization. And the Tamarack Institute is what we consider a field catalyst. So we see our role as an organization that brings together different communities and organizations and individuals, those with lived and living experience, to help bring them together to establish shared language, shared goals, and to bring together efforts that might otherwise be fractured to create a greater impact, which I think is a lovely mission because there are so many people that are working really hard to tackle really complicated and complex problems. Tamarack got our start focusing mostly on eliminating poverty in Canada, and that is still one of our main goals. But over the years, we've become a bit more, I want to say, issue agnostic. So we still have that heart where poverty is at the root of everything that we do. But we've also learned to apply the skills we developed in other areas. So I'm more recently involved in climate transitions. We also focus on building belonging communities across Canada and the US, creating great outcomes for youth. So it's a wonderful place, and I get to balance kind of two different types of work. One of which is focused on network building. So my work with climate transitions is focused on building kind of a membership model and bringing our climate transitions members through learning curriculums and helping them increase their capacity so that they can uh, impact the communities they're already working with. And then with Skills for Change or the Learning Center, get to work more as a consultant within sort of a social enterprise to do short, medium, sometimes long-term consulting work with government agencies, communities, or community groups to focus on kind of really specific community problems. So I've done work on um, kind of municipal littering strategies. I've worked with Public Health Canada on some longer term stuff. So it's really a huge range, but the focus is how do we bring people together to tackle complex community issues. So it's a really exciting place to work. You get to do a lot of different things. Um, and I think the fun thing about me and my work is that I started off in the communications field. So when I first came to Tamarack, did not have a lot of community work experience and started working off within marketing and communications. And through that, through iterations of probably hundreds of webinars and interviews like this and workshops, you start to learn what folks are doing, what sorts of frameworks or tools are most helpful, and that plus, some formal education landed me here where I get the great privilege to work directly with folks now.
Right. Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I was going to ask you, like, what inspires you about the work that you do?
Yeah,
So,
I
mhm.
I think the most inspiring thing, and I love the framing that Tamarack and other organizations, and I know SETC has this as well, is that it is rooted in an understanding that there are already people doing great work. Like it is not sort of a parachuting in and saying, hey, we have all the answers, we understand everything completely. Our role is to kind of catalyze the stuff that people are already doing, whether those are unpaid members of local communities, folks with lived or living experience of poverty, or anything else. Like the work is already happening. That's the best recognition there is. What we can bring is maybe some frameworks or tools or capacity as sort of a third party to lift up and shine a spotlight and accelerate some of the work that's already being done. I think that's really important just because um, there are, I mean, almost every community I work with, there is a history of folks coming in a very extractive way to say, okay, here's what needs to be done. We understand the issue, we understand the context, so here's what we're going to say. And that process of kind of parachuting in and telling people is very harmful, and it references past harms and trauma. It doesn't help anyone. It doesn't solve the issue, and it actually pushes us further away from kind of our idealized future state where there is no poverty, there is belonging. It gets in the way and it frustrates that purpose, and it harms people along the way. And so what inspires me is the opportunity to kind of to jump in, meet people who are diligently and faithfully and compassionately working towards eliminating poverty in their community or creating more equitable futures as we think about climate. It's important to me that that's the framing of it because yeah, otherwise you are just you're treading on folks and their histories and their experiences.
Exactly. There is that fine line for sure, and it's refreshing to know that you're aware of those things, and you act accordingly to what is in the best interest of the community you're working with. So that's awesome. So now on the flip side, like what challenges or barriers have you faced in your work, and how have you overcome them, or in the process of overcoming them?
Yeah, I this is a tricky question. And so I thought of one thing and it's a bit about how we work with folks. So on the network side, it's very much rooted in, medium to long-term relationships where folks renew their membership year after year. We bring them through all sorts of learning opportunities. We connect them with coaches, and there's, lots of opportunities for peer learning. And I think that's really beautiful because the work they're doing in community is rooted in relationships, as we talked about. But then our partnership also kind of leans on relationships. So that kind of long-term strategy, I feel like, is very consistent and iterative, and it just makes sense to me. When I think about some of the other work I do with communities, on the kind of consulting side, there's a bit of a mismatch sometimes between the format and the ultimate message, which is that, it's rooted in relationships. Things tend to build a little more slowly. So, as an example, I do a lot of work around community engagement and community consultation and collaboration. So I will come in and an organization has an issue that they're working through. Maybe they need to revamp a program, or they find that the other people they're working with have different definitions for the same sorts of things, and it makes it really hard to evaluate the progress they're making on an issue. So they'll bring me in, we'll all sit in the room together, and we'll design a very collaborative workshop, maybe a couple of days, maybe a week, and we all talk about, oh, how are we working together to eliminate poverty in our town? And so we'll come up with all these definitions. It's very participatory. It's a really lovely time, and it works. But it isn't everything, right? Like that experience, we're creating a bit of a container. We're making sure that the container itself is accessible, that the language we're using is accessible to folks across all different types of contexts. But it's also contained, right? It is one experience, and they might have 10, 12, 20 meetings that year where they're working through other problems. And the container we build in one doesn't necessarily solve some of the cultural issues that build tension when we're working together. Um, see if I have. Oh, I do have it. Yeah. Like a book like this is a great example. Designed for Belonging. I reference this constantly, and it's full of these really great frameworks and tools and language to show how best we can work together and build meetings that are um, collaborative and helpful and fruitful. Um, but there's all sorts of stuff that happens outside of that meeting that matters just as much, if not more, than what we do in that week that I'm kind of parachuting in to work with them for. So there's a tension between like how do we have like a really great experience and come up with a plan and set language with our short time together, but how do you also encourage folks to think a little differently about how they collaborate with their partners, so that every other interaction they have across the year and over the years, as they faithfully and diligently work towards eliminating poverty or creating better and more equitable futures, how can we make sure that that also has that element of belonging and care and collaboration? So it's that's the thing I'm working through right now is how to address that kind of cultural piece within an organization or a round table, so that the entire experience for folks who are working together is is kind of enriching. Just because, um, as a consultant primarily, you're just not around all that much. We're there for a short time, so that's something I'm working through myself.
Right. It totally makes sense. I mean, we're dealing with different dynamics, different spectrums, and different community mindsets too. Like, everybody comes from different parts of walks of life. So you input and you give the support that's needed. But how do you kind of frame it in a way where, it can be sustainable? You're trying to kind of give that kind of sustainable outcome that they can, it's like you make it and then you give it and let them run with it. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Here's
yeah.
what so I
Yeah,
understand
and
totally.
there's all sorts of complications, right? I had one contract with a client, and it was a discussion around collaboration and people feeling like they were too busy. And so we brought
Mm,
together all the workers. I was working, like my main contact was with management, and so we designed this really great experience, this wonderful container, for folks to have an opportunity to voice those things and say, "Hey, we have too much on our plate. We're pulled in too many different directions."
mm,
A great opportunity to voice concerns, because this was sort of a frustration and a hurt that had been building over years since the onset of COVID. And then we started to get feedback where folks felt like they were pushed into this conversation that they didn't have time for, because they were too busy. And so like the container was really nice, and we had all these great activities and opportunities to share hard truths. But outside of the container was the organization pushing folks, almost kicking and screaming into this conversation. The behavior to get them to the conversation was an example of the thing we needed to talk about. And it's like, okay, there is a mismatch here. And there's got to be a way to kind of have a broader conversation to say, it doesn't matter if we have like a hard conversation about this stuff, if how we get people to the conversation is also tainted or hard or pressured. So you learn a lot of hard lessons over the years, and it's important not just to kind of hyper focus on the container we're building and the tools we're using. There are all sorts of other factors that obviously really matter, and you only learn about those by talking to the people on the ground.
that's it. Absolutely. Absolutely. All right. So tell me, is there anything that you want to amplify, anything new you're working on or want to amplify at this time?
Yeah, I think for me, like this piece about collaboration and the ways in which we work together is a big focus for myself and my colleague Darren. We do have a workshop coming up called Turf Trust and Collaboration, which explores a bit of that. Um, it's a really great kind of half day session. We talk about kind of the different pressures that live behind the idea of collaboration and this idea of turf, which is not something I had heard about before coming to Tamarack. But turf is basically the space that we build around ourselves when we're working with others, almost as a defensive mechanism, where turf is my area of control, my domain. And when we're brought into collaboration with other people, quite often there is tension where all of a sudden I need to give up a bit of control over my domain. And so turf is this kind of concept that we have to work through, because at least at Tamarack, we believe that collaboration requires bringing down a lot of those walls and giving up control and power, especially to those with lived and living experience. But quite often that's a nice concept for folks up until the point where they actually have to do the work of sharing the power itself. And so this workshop, Turf Trust in collaboration, is our attempt to tackle some of those things. So would definitely, yeah, um, just share that.
Right. Well, that's good. And I know I know that's not easy too, but that's what it is. Collaboration is the key to social change. So if we're looking to change, and have positive outcomes, collaboration it's a no-brainer, and but it's the mindset.
Yes, yes,
It really is mind work that has to be done for sure.
yes.
So now let me ask you, how do you feel about the future of social impact?
Yeah, I mean, this changes probably daily, and I'm sure it does for you too. I am an optimist though. And I think that's important. Not like a blind optimism. Um, the world is difficult, and I say this to my partner all the time. It's like I am looking forward to living in boring times. I'm not sure it's happening anytime soon, but it would be nice because there are, as I mentioned, and I have the opportunity to meet so many of them, like diligent, faithful people working towards a greater good in their community that are being selfless and uplifting voices and just there are so many people doing so many good things, and I just wish we could hear about it more often. I feel like so much of our attention is driven to the lowest common denominator and things that incite and frustrate and kind of bring out the worst in us. I I am I am optimistic the more I talk to people that are doing the work, but I am more frustrated at the same time by our refusal to talk about it. And so I'm trying to do my part and when I work with members, when I do coaching, when I do consulting, every interaction is an opportunity to share someone's story. And so when I started this work as a consultant, I don't have a black book of stories of working with organizations. You're starting from scratch, but every time I finish an engagement with someone or I leave a community, I'm always trying to ask about, whether I can share their story because that is fuel for the other people who feel isolated, who feel maybe a little less hopeful about the work they're doing in isolation. And that's why, Setsi and Tamarack, I feel like they're very much needed these days because the work is being done. There are excellent people out there giving everything they have to improve their communities and improve the outcomes of people they will never meet. But we just need the opportunity to hear about it. So that's why I'm thankful for opportunities like these.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it was Sylvia who says, I asked her that question. She said she's quoting somebody else, and she liked that, and I liked it too. She's like she's a pissed off optimist.
Yes,
you know,
yes,
and I said, I agree with that totally. You know what I mean? Because it's a lot of work, it's a lot of cleanup. Let me put it that way. It's a
yeah.
lot of cleanup that needs to be done, and not just what we're doing, but also the next generation that we're leaving. What are we leaving? Are we leaving bags for them to have to go through, ruffle through, and clean up? And because they are holding us accountable, these new generations now, we are laying a foundation, but they're going to be, what are you leaving us? What mess are you leaving us, and why? The who, what, when, where, and why. They are demanding, you know these statistics here. So yeah, I feel the same way. What Setsy's doing, what Tamarack is doing, we have to be optimistic. We have to be. It's a work that we're doing, but then there has to be an outcome. What is the outcome to what we're doing? A lot of times in the past, it's okay documenting, saying okay, this is, but what is the actual outcome from A to Z,
Hmm.
of what we're doing? So I hear you. Loud and clear. So, okay. So, my next question for you is, what would be your ultimate goal, and what does success look like to you?
Yeah. I think my ultimate goal, like if I think about working with communities, members, organizations, whatever it is, is that through my work with them, they will have unlocked some avenue to get closer to achieving impact on their complex issue. If poverty, climate equity, whatever the case is, my goal is to make something a little easier for them. And quite often that's through having these conversations and building these nice containers and hopefully establishing some sort of shared language. The impact of that, I think, is yeah, I'm craving that feedback that like this unlocked something for me, or this got us over the hump. This helped us address a past harm, uncover hurts, helped us launch this new program. It's really different from case to case. But I think the beauty of work through a systems catalyst is that like my success is ultimately the success of my clients. And so, there have been launches of neighborhood association programs in different municipalities, or folks taking up an asset-based community development approach who had never had heard of that term before, or, different ways to evaluate the impact of social supports for family programs. It's about giving folks the tools and the wisdom to use them to do stuff that matters to them. And so most of the time that is more than enough because you hear stories of the families impacted or the neighborhoods and you go like, yes, this is great. On harder weeks, it can be a little more difficult to be kind of one step removed from the ultimate impact. But that's why those conversations matter, the stories matter, and certainly the understanding of the ultimate impact matters because that's ultimately what drives our work. Because it doesn't matter if we have great conversations or good meetings or good consultations if nothing changes, because that will be an ultimate like that's the ultimate failure. The purpose is to catalyze and to help people achieve impact. So. I'm constantly craving those stories.
Right, right. Totally agree. Totally agree. Wow, Duncan, this has been very, very inspirational. I can hear the passion in your voice and the work that you put in and as, as a whole, um, as an organization. So my last question for you is just please leave your, your calls to actions and just your final thoughts at this time.
Yeah, I think if I could leave anyone with anything, and I'm the last person to claim wisdom for myself, that's the best part of my job is I get to show people that the wisdom is in the room. Um, it is just to think kind of outside of that box, to kind of as much as we look for things like tools and frameworks that are going to solve all of our problems, I think ultimately a lot of the work we do to achieve impact on poverty, on equitable climate transitions, on youth outcomes, is driven by our relationship with the people that we're working with, both alongside and ultimately serving. So I would just really, really prompt people to think about how we communicate with people, even just outside of those co-working sessions, co-design, um, community consultations. I think of it like a relationship, and I often joke that my job feels a bit like I'm a marriage counselor between, organizations or team members. Within a relationship, it's not about the big moments, right? It's about the everyday, because there are so many more boring Tuesday mornings than there are extravagant date nights. And so when we think about how we work with others, it's very important to think about the routine, the emails, the coffee chats, rather than the big kind of consultations, because that's the stuff that sticks with people.
Amazing, amazing, Duncan. Well, on behalf of SETSI, we wish you much success in what you're doing, much mental fortitude, mental health,
Mm.
physical wellness as well, because, it does take a lot. And so we will definitely be collabing as we always do and building and yeah, just really, seeing that vision, bringing it into fruition as much as possible and passing it on and having the next generation doing it even bigger and better. So we thank you once again for taking the time today.
Yeah, thank you so much, and much love to Setsi.
Oh, thank you so much. So we will close the way that we began by acknowledging the original stewards of the various lands that we are on. We also acknowledge our ancestors. We acknowledge all those who toiled without compassion or compensation. We acknowledge all the elders and community stalwarts whose shoulders we stand on as we build, share, learn together for our collective liberation and sovereignty. So, Duncan, this is not a goodbye. This is a see you later on some some collaboration that we're doing, and all the best to you today and for the weeks to come. All right.
Likewise. Thank you so much.
Okay. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye bye.